So good morning, everyone. We have 10 o'clock, and I would like to welcome everyone to the presentation of the ACER Gas Wholesale Market Monitoring Report 2021, and also covering the first half of 2022 in order to catch the latest developments, because of course the recent developments are quite different from those in 2021, and it needed to be covered in order to be up to date here. Also, the recent developments reflecting the global high global LNG prices, plus of course the price increase after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with the scarcity and the restricted gas flows coming from Russia. So in order to have a proper picture here and also be able to look at the various elements and discussions on the impacts here, this part is covered as a novelty also in this wholesale gas market volume from 2021. Furthermore, I would like also to announce already now that there will be two more volumes coming. The decarbonization volume, looking at, in particular, hydrogen and decarbonized gas markets. So also very relevant discussions, plus the retail and consumer protection volume, looking more specifically also at impacts of high prices on consumers and the whole picture there. Those will follow. This one will follow in September, and the other one will follow in November. I would also like to mention that this one that we are presenting today will be published on the 14th of July after the BOR meeting next week. So that is important here for you. So you will see the outcome and what is presented today, the analysis, etc., in more detail than in the volume to be published next week. Of course, as I mentioned already, the different market context due to recent events will trigger discussions also on the recent legislation and also possibly measures to be taken to mitigate certain effects, in particular for consumers. But also we have to see this in the wider context, of course, of the proposed gas market decarbonization package. In order not to, let's say, lose out on chances for the longer term perspective on the market design due to short-term interventionistic measures. So this has to be seen as a whole, and we should not lose out on longer-term issues. That is, I think, important. Yeah, as mentioned, we all know in 2022 the recent price increases, and of course also increases in volatility due to the Russian invasion, causes a lot of concerns for all market participants, and as I said, requires reflections on how to mitigate some of the impact that we have there. Yes, I think these are, let's say, the appetizers, and the analysis will follow in more detail. And we now will start with the analysis part, and I would like to hand over to Joachim.
Thanks a lot, Annegret. Indeed, I will move into the block of analytical slides. Nina, can you please advance the slides? So another one, please. And yeah, this is the agenda, and another one. And here we are. Yeah. Perfect. So this first slide provides an overview of the events that have been driving the gas prices in recent months, and we are using here TTF month ahead prices as reference. So what we observe is that the price surge can be split in three phases. In the first one, from May and until autumn 2021, the price rises were driven by the lessened LNG imports into the EU. This was because spot LNG diverted to higher price ACER markets. And this was also in conjunction with narrow pipeline flows and recovering post-COVID demand. In the second phase, from autumn 2021, the uncertainty on Russian supply and the low levels of gas in storages put additional pressure on prices. In fact, this was despite that these high prices, that the stronger high prices managed to attract extra spot LNG into the EU. Then we have a last phase, and this is starting from end February 2022, and after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where clearly, as Annegret was saying, the prices have been impacted by supply scarcity risks. And since recently, prices are visibly affected by the partial halts in Nord Stream. As known, flows are today only 40% of the total nominal capacity, and this has brought prices about 130 euros per megawatt hour. Perhaps we can move into the next slide. Please, Nina. Here we are. Well, where the first slide has looked at TTF hub price evolution, this figure compares the hub prices against the evolution of long-term supply contract prices. And then we observe that there are substantial price difference between hub prices and also between the prices of the long-term contracts. And this is in view of the elements that are used in the price formulas of the long-term contracts. As the figure shows, those contracts that contain hub products or short-term duration in their indexations have become the most expensive. For example, in the figure is the red line, the example of Norway to Belgium contract that is quite correlated to this hub price of TTF with 1 month of delay. In contrast, those contracts with larger time lag oil indexations have become more price competitive. This is then the example, the Algeria long-term contract into Italy that is marked in green. And then Russian and LNG contracts, also shown in the slide, tend to comprise a combination of hub and oil elements, and each contract will have a significant some price difference depending on the exact formulas, but again are overall also clearly rising. So in the next slide, after discussing prices, we also want to give an overview of the evolution of the EU and the UK, because we do the analysis combined, the EU and UK gas supply portfolio. So what the figure shows is the supply breakdown per supply origin source in 2021 at the left part of the figure, and in contrast to the first half of 2022 in the right side of the figure. And then what we observe is, as also said by Annegret in introductory remarks, we observe that a significant supply rebalance has occurred in the first half of 2022, and Russian pipeline flows have decisively lessened. In fact, this is by 40% year on year, and it's like the circle shows at the right part, they just cover for 20% of new supplies in 2022, in contrast to more than 30% in 2021 for Russian pipeline flows. So there are Russian supplies on LNG. But this decrease in Russian flows have been overall well offset by rising LNG imports that have risen by 60% year on year, and particularly, as also the figure shows, from deliveries from the United States that have sizably risen, and they account today for more than half of total EU LNG imports. All this supply portfolio evolution is also occurring in a context where gas consumption has decreased by almost 10% in view of the extremely high energy prices that are impacting on energy intensive sectors and the efficiency measures. But however, on the other hand, storage injections have been much higher this year, which also requires of additional supply, additional flows to meet this 80% target. And I think the figure is more than 50 BCMs year on year have been imported for filling or have been injected in storage sites. So this is for the 3 slides from my blog, and I want to pass now the floor to Mitya, who will continue analyzing some aspects starting with long-term contracts evolution. Thank you very much.
Next slide, Nina. So one of the new focus areas in this edition of the MMR have been gas pipeline long-term contracts. We assessed several aspects of pipeline gas LTCs delivering to the EU, including the LTC expiration calendar, which is shown on the slide. To explain the slide a bit, the different areas represent the source and volume of the LTC supply. For instance, green indicates Norwegian LTC supply, red indicates Russian LTC supply, and gray indicates volumes contracted from Gazprom that have since been cancelled in 2022 over the ruble dispute or because the buyer was sanctioned by the Russian state. The analysis shows that pipeline LTC commitments have been decreasing and will continue to decrease over next years. However, besides the decrease in Norwegian long-term contractual volumes, the volume of LTC supply does not really change significantly between 2022 and, for instance, 2027, and this includes contracted Russian LTC volumes. This may potentially represent a misalignment between EU policy objectives and commercial reality. Next slide, please. A related topic covered in the MMR is the expiration of gas transportation capacity legacy contracts and the extent to which expired capacity has been replaced by new short-term bookings of capacity that follow the capacity allocation network code. In the figure, the dotted line shows the legacy capacity expired per month, while the bars show by what type of product and to what extent the expired capacity has been replaced. The figure shows a longer-term evolution, but why we're showing it today is what is highlighted in the bottom right corner in green, which shows what has happened from the last quarter of 2021 onwards in the gas transportation market. And as you can see, the use of short-term products has increased strongly. This was likely in response to decreased Russian supply, resulting changes to supply sourcing patterns and rerouting of flows in the internal gas market. In 2022, these changes to supply routes have highlighted some issues as well. So what has been shown is that there are bottlenecks for transporting gas in a west to east direction, as well as a need to adjust gas transportation auction design mechanisms, especially in a very high spread environment. Next slide, please. We will conclude the analytical part of this presentation with a figure about the market expectations about gas wholesale prices in the future. The slide shows snapshots of the TTF forward curve taken at different times as this energy crisis has evolved. In red, for instance, is the TTF forward price at the beginning of October 2021, when markets expected that the gas price would drop significantly already in the course of 2022. While the line in blue is the latest snapshot taken a couple of weeks ago after the latest reduction of gas flows from Russia. This blue line shows that markets now expect that the gas prices will persist at high levels until 2024. However, there is likely both significant upside but also downside potential to these prices. While the gas price will depend on many factors, an effective internal market strengthened by supply diversification, where market integration is maintained, will help put downward pressure on prices. So with that, I would like to conclude this part of the presentation and hand over to Chila Bartok from ACER and Markus Krug, representing ACER, who will present our recommendations aimed at improving the functioning of the internal gas market.
Good morning. As discussed before, after relevant volumes of Russian gas have fallen out of the EU supply structure, the supply uncertainty in the EU led to unprecedented prices. And consequentially, Nina, could you move the slides? One more, please. There we go. And so consequentially, there is a lot of thinking how we could reset the gas contracting equilibrium and what kind of gas contracting strategies we should have in order to manage and rethink our energy dependency. And this issue is in the forefront of policy discussion, but also political discussion. Our recommendation in this area are as follows. We believe that hub prices and hub trading have managed to attract additional supplies in the EU, as well as help sustain market integration, help manage the crisis that we faced in the fourth quarter and then in particular in the first half of 2022. Since they were both helpful, while we understand a lot of criticism that hub trading has received, we suggest to preserve the hub trading model and use it to help to attract additional gas volumes and in particular LNG. We also show the picture about the hub development, and we also conclude that we have not seen significant changes in what we have reported for the last year. There are also areas where we would accelerate measures, and we would accelerate the means to reestablish security of supply. That might entail to sign new long-term gas supply contracts, but we also suggest companies to aim for as much as supply flexibility as possible, and also with a view to the energy transition, and also in the view that on the long run, the role of gas will be reduced as a consequence of this transition. We would also suggest exploring the use of the EU energy purchase platform to enhance EU buyers' negotiation power. We are well aware as well that there are many questions about these platforms and about how this platform would function. But we think that for smaller companies, the platform may offer options like pooling demand that might be critical to also manage security of supply for those cases. And then finally, we would also suggest a few changes in the current practices. One thought we had that there might be value to look into the oversight measures over interval price limits at gas trading hubs to manage excessive volatility, which is triggered when new and unexpected information appears in the market, like related to sudden or supply disruptions. And finally, we also suggest having a centralized and mandatory reporting on long-term contracts to understand what are the risks that are related to price indexations and the end dates of these contracts. And with that, I'm passing on to Markus Krug.
Okay, thank you, Cilla. Trying to activate my camera. Yes, it works. So thank you very much, Cilla. If we move to the next slide, I'm now straightly going to the second area of our recommendations, which are focused on the preparation for the next winter. So on the one hand, looking at infrastructure, flexibility, demand savings, and also monitoring aspects. So again, here we have structured the recommendations in these three parts. So we think there are certain elements which have served us well, which we have achieved and that should be preserved. So that's the first part. But then again, also, of course, there are aspects to strengthen, to accelerate, and then certainly also some areas where more changes needed. So if I start with the first one, so what to preserve? I think already, the market functioning is something, and also the low barriers to cross-border trade is something that is working well and sort of provided by the network codes, harmonized network codes, facilitating cross-border trade. This is something we can build on. Of course, this does not mean that everything is perfect. Also here, I think there are areas, as was mentioned before, where also regarding capacity allocation, certain improvements should be done. But overall, this is something we can build on. Second point here is an element regarding cross-border transportation capacities, where a lot of work has been done already in the past. This started after 2009, sort of the supply disruption via Ukraine that we have observed beginning of January then. And after that, I think a lot of investments at many or almost all interconnection points into reverse flows have been done. And this is also where we are benefiting now from. So I think just to mention an example, earlier this week, you know that the annual capacity auctions took place, and for the first time ever, we have seen substantial capacity bookings, for example, from Italy towards Austria at that interconnection point where after 2009, the reverse flow, physical reverse flow has been implemented, but so far not really used a lot. But now I think it's good to have those reverse flows in place. Second area is, but also linked to this first area, but again here, not everything is perfect. I think there are some targeted LNG and congestion-related investments that still need to be done or speeded up, especially under a regionally coordinated approach, we think. So mainly on those for those non-coastal markets where also there, I think access to LNG should be improved. The infrastructure should be improved, but knowing about also the further developments, I think the recommendation would be here also to say, well, regarding new infrastructure, to say that it should be as much as possible also ready to transport hydrogen in the future. And the second area, when it comes to what to accelerate, I think a lot, has been done on the demand saving side. Some things, as was mentioned before, also happened naturally. We have to say, due to the high prices, certain industries have, of course, decreased demand quite already compared to last year. But still, I think here these strategies could be improved and further developed, especially energy efficiency measures in the building and for heating and cooling. And we say based on the CBA, so there where I think also public funding needs to be spent, this should of course be very much targeted to where it can achieve the most effects. And lastly, third area, so what to change. This is an area where I think as long as markets are functioning, and this is something I think where consumers it should be possible for them to, in a market-based way, to promote demand side response measures by providing IT platforms, for example, where certain volumes industrial customers could offer to limit their consumption and then be compensated for that, and having such mechanisms in place in a market-based way to help these demand side response measures. That's one area. And the second very much important area is, of course, the storage regulation, which we have now. We see member states are working on that. And of course, ACER is supporting Commission and member states to achieving the filling targets. Here I think would recommend looking really into those measures, starting with use it or lose it, and all the other more strategic instruments that are there for member states to really ensure that storages are filled to the required levels before the start of the winter. Yes, that's it from my side. So thank you very much. And this concludes the part of the presentation of the MMR and the recommendations. So I would now hand back to Annegret to take us further through.
Many thanks, Markus and Chilla, for the recommendations. I now would like to call on our external speakers. And the first one, and I saw he arrived, is Miguel from the European Commission. Please, Miguel.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but not yet see you.
Can you see me now?
Yeah, now that's fine.
You can see me.
Okay,
very
go
good,
ahead.
very good. Good to see you, Annegret. I hope you're doing fine, colleagues. So, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for inviting us in this seminar. I think it's very timely, and we are very happy to see the richness of the analysis included in the market monitoring report. I have to say that we agree very much with the conclusions that appear in this report, and especially I would like to start by saying that we agree very much with the recommendations of the report itself and the conclusions. I would like to structure my intervention around how these findings fit in the Repower EU plan and the further plans of the European Commission. I mean, as you know, we are in a context where we seem to be adding challenges to our daily work. I mean, we were in a situation where prices in the spot market for gas have increased to ranges that were, of course, unknown, and that has brought us also to higher electricity prices. We have seen, and there were, reasons behind those increases, behind the recovery in Asia, tightness in supply in certain parts of the world. Now, on top of this, we had the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in February. I think the slide that you were presenting, with the evolution of the Dutch TTF index shows very well how geopolitical developments are impacting very much on the prices, on the wholesale prices of gas. But with these geopolitical tensions, also we had a response from the European Union. I mean, the European Commission came with a repower proposal on March after as I said, the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that put on the table the discussion of the phasing out of the fossil fuels from Russia. This was discussed at Versailles by the heads of state and government, and the Commission came with the Repower EU plan. Now, I think it is very important with this Repower EU plan to differentiate what can be done in the immediate term, what can be done in the short term, and what is more of a medium to long-term plan. And therefore, I mean, in the short term, we can basically do two things. Diversification of supply, which means third countries, but also fuel switching. And this is according to the infrastructure that we have today, or we can reduce demand. And this is, a point where we are working quite hard these days in the European Commission, making the point that optimal and targeted reductions in demand would put us in a better situation for next winter, and in terms of security of supply. Now, I think it is very important also to that this diversification of supply can go up until a point, I mean, until a physical point and until a point of, the existing infrastructure. And this is why in the Repower plan, we came up with the identification of missing links in terms of infrastructure, which are limited, in terms of additional investments that might be needed for gas. It might not be that much. We did an exercise with NSOG. It's around 10 and 15 billion euros that might be needed. Member states are already moving in that direction. I mean, there are LNG capacities, in Europe that will be available by the end of the year. We also see that several investments in terms of pipeline, they are being finalized, and this will put us in a better situation. Still, the challenge we are facing is a significant one, because we need to keep in mind that we are in a situation where there might be missing volumes if there are further supply disruptions from Russia. So that means that we need to continue, and this is why the Repower plan is a plan over different years. Now, in terms of the recommendation of the report, I mean, we are happy to see that overall the interpretation of the wholesale gas market developments converges very much with the assessment of the European Commission and provides a good overlap. And I think it's very important that we provide consistent messages to the member states and to the policymakers. We see that hub pricing on the gas market remains of key importance for the future of the internal gas markets. And currently, there is no perceivable demand from market actors for returning to older practices in gas contracts. And here, I mean oil indexation. We also believe that the transparency of gas hubs should be ensured, and in case of reduced liquidity, hampering the correct price signals, measures, from the financial market perspective, like circuit breakers could be envisaged to look into the volatility. But it's very important that the market signals allow for the LNG to come to Europe. I mean, I think that this is a very important point, because whatever we do needs to go in this direction of ensuring the security of supply in Europe. I think it was this month actually where we have had more volumes coming from US LNG than we have from Russia's pipe gas. And this, I mean, has put us, let's say, in a better position, and is also helping in filling the storages. In LNG contracts, I mean, something that we are looking is that it is reasonable to include benchmarks that might be other than the TTF. We had the statement earlier this year between President von der Leyen and President Biden on an MOU that is currently being developed regarding the volumes that the US will be made available in the next years. And in this statement that was drafted in February, there was a reference to Henry Hub. Now, regarding the European energy platform, I mean, we believe that this might play a key role in ensuring security of supply by, helping in the conversation across member states and with market operators, optimizing infrastructure, optimizing the outreach to third countries. And we are currently in, the process of developing what could be models, to pull demand together. At the same time, this energy platform is developing some regional groups. The one on Southeast Europe has been launched. The one on Central and Eastern Europe has been launched. We will see later this month the Baltic one, the Northwest and the Southwest Europe being launched. And we believe that it's very good that member states are having, an enhanced conversation on, as I said, the optimization of infrastructure, outreach to third countries, and the development of possible common purchasing initiatives together. Now, regarding LNG and long-term contracts, I mean, we believe that this can be an option. Clearly, it is an option already today for replacing Russian gas. But that said, we need to take into account that decarbonization objectives and the decreasing role of natural gas should not lead to duplication of infrastructure and the stranded assets. As I said before, I mean, in the context of repower, we need to develop some missing links. I mean, there are 155 BCMs of Russian gas that need to be replaced. The maximum regasification that we have in Europe today is around 120 and 130 BCMs per year, which is, an increase of 40-50 BCMs compared to 2021. But I would invite you to look at the bottlenecks that we have identified. Now, the two final points of my intervention: one about the new regulation on gas storages, where we have set up this objective of 80% fullness rate of EU storages by the 1st of November this year. We are in a better position than we were last year. I mean, the storages were being refilled until the incident of Nord Stream 1 at an appropriate rate. But with the latest developments in Freeport and Nord Stream 1 and the risks that we have ahead of us, we note that the reaction was not a decrease in demand, but a decrease in the rate of filling of storages. And therefore, something that we are working quite a lot now, and I think that this was announced by President von der Leyen, is on the need to develop further demand-saving measures. And here, the reason for that is very clear. Macroeconomically, it is much better to do targeted and optimized demand measures than to face a complete supply shock later down the road. So the case for targeted demand measures in the current circumstances makes sense from an economic point of view to avoid later in the winter when we might need more gas to face a severe macroeconomic shock. So my conclusion, many thanks for inviting us, and congratulations for the excellent market monitoring report with which, as I said, we agree very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel, for the insights, and good to see that indeed the assessment is aligned. Thanks a lot. And now we have Pavel from EFED. Please, Pavel, I saw that you were somewhere there.
I hope you can hear me, and you will see me in a second as well. There's
Okay.
a lag with my camera, but yeah, there I am. I hope you can see me now.
Yeah, there you are, and the slide is there as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the presentation of the report, and thank you also to Miguel for his reaction. I think that in both cases, the key conclusion that stems from it is actually that markets still work and are the right thing to have for Europe for the years to come. And that's already very good because, you know, usually there's a tendency to think that where prices go very high, there's something wrong with the market functioning well, whereas this is simply and possibly, unfortunately, not the case. It's simply the fact that we are facing prolonged shortage of gas, and the consequences of it is that prices go high, and then it's actually not much we can do about it in the context, nothing in a sustainable manner, at least. And what we need to recognize here is that there are upsides to having prices going high, meaning that that these prices actually attract more gas coming into Europe, supporting our supply security, replacing the missing volumes coming from Russia. And B, they actually also encourage lower demand that we will be needing. This is something that Miguel already signaled before. And of course, there are consequences of having high prices. We need to make sure that vulnerable consumers are protected. And I just wanted to reassure everyone here that, you know, the issue of high prices and high volatility are actually as much of a problem to our members as to anyone else. And of course, there are our companies are sort of struggling with the situation as well, but we have measures to deal with the volatility. We are doing our best to manage the situation properly and ensure prudent behavior. And I don't believe that we will simply we can simply hope for having any administrative measure that can either address the high prices that stem from supply shortage or address high volatility that stem from high uncertainty that can actually be done in a sustainable manner. So this is something we just need to cope with for the upcoming periods. Looking forward, I believe that there's a very good slide that has been presented by ACER showing that the markets already anticipates where the prices will stabilize. And this is already something good. We do recognize that the prices will go down probably 2024 in 2 years' time. And this is something that we need to remember both in the context of our ambitions as the EU to reduce on the consumption of gas in general, to switch to hydrogen, etc., but also in the context of what we want to do as a response measure in the current crisis. And I think that this potentially strong preference for long-term arrangements that's been popping up in different countries of the EU might have its consequence. And we should actually need to realize that there will be consequences to that as well. So I believe that possibly striking the right balance between the short-term and long-term arrangements should best be left to the market to decide where this balance lies, rather than assume that the state will say what share of the annual demand should be underwritten under a long-term arrangement. And also in this context, we should remember that the EU purchase platform is trying to strike a very difficult deal to arrange internally as the EU that will probably not come into effect in 2-3 years time. That would be my assumption, that the gas will simply not start flowing. And if we look at the expectations of the market of what will going to happen with all the FSRUs being installed, with the demand going down, etc., we might soon realize that the deals that will be signed by the member states for the purchase of gas will deliver gas at a period where it's not necessarily needed anymore in these volumes and under this stringent contract that might be struck. Because we also need to remember that we are now working in a seller's market, really, and assuming that we can sign very flexible contracts for long term is probably not really realistic. Third thing I wanted to note is that, of course, there's there is the need to react in the short term and ensure that we can go through the crisis. So storage filling obligations are obviously a tool that can help us to last through the emergency. I think the NSOC analysis show well that coordinated response can help us actually manage through the crisis well, and storages have a key role to play in this. But we need to, of course, remember that the incentives that we have now for the filling obligations are actually working, and apparently we are largely on track when it comes to meeting the targets for the upcoming winter. So let's make sure that we actually try to make sure that we try not to administer the process too much, because this market-based approach will surely make this additional insurance more affordable than anything else that we can come up with in the media. And finally, I would like to note that you mentioned that there are low barriers to trade in the EU. Unfortunately, we do not believe that's the case. Especially Central and Southeastern European countries have still a lot to do in this context. And there's a lot of issues that need still to be addressed for the markets to function properly, and so that we can actually benefit from all the flexibilities they offer. And this spans from the licensing obligations in different countries, like in Poland, like possibly in Romania in the coming months as well, because there's been some changes, but also through tariffs that might not be cost reflective in many cases and can actually affect the way we cooperate, and of course the affordability of gas in the coming years. And finally, we need to make sure that the mechanisms we have can actually support the flexibility the market offers. And this goes back to our FUNC request over the availability of capacities at different borders and the way it's being allocated. We do believe that there's scope for improvement, and certainly it's better off to think of different solutions to ensuring timely access to capacities than to assume cuts to the bid sizes for different products to ensure that the auction simply closes. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. A lot of ideas here. Thanks a lot. And finally, last but not least, I have Broniak from Eurogas, please. And please try to stay in time. We want to have some discussion. I see questions pouring in.
Yeah, I can do that.
Good.
Thanks for the report. Thanks for the invitation to join this morning as well. Let's say from our first review in the Secretariat, we by and large would support it as well. Maybe just one or two small words of caution throughout. We are indeed in very exceptional times already, the climate emergency, then the invasion, now a threat on security of supply and increasing, I should say. It's very important to pause and to reflect and to have this kind of good quality data and well thought out recommendations one thing that we definitely can't afford right now is anything like panic moves or false starts. For our part in Eurogas, what we've started to do is take some new approaches, change a bit the way we work, for example, with between the TSOs and the DSOs launching a new event together to share insights. Also, last month we held the first EU-US LNG forum. That's an industry-led initiative to overcome bottlenecks and putting climate really at the top of the agenda. So when I say maybe one or two small words of caution, for example, we would have a question over oversight on contracts. What exactly would that entail? And is there any risk that could be a cumbersome addition to processes or undermine the commercial expertise in negotiations? More broadly, coming back to this point about trade and flows globally, we have started working towards a pathway with the LNG allies. Probably it would be sensible on our part to consider similar industry initiatives in other relevant geographies beyond just US. We are quite troubled, I must say, by the resurgence of coal, and you know, it's understandable, sort of fairly, let's say, acceptable in an emergency situation. I think it's incredibly important that we don't become complacent about this or take this as a new normal. We really have to stay the course on the energy transition, and that means, you know, we're dealing with an emergency, but at the same time, we really have to keep the focus on the longer term. And I know you're going to present a report on hydrogen, but really the opportunities of REPowerEU are crucial. The role, for example, of the DSO in terms of that kind of domestic energy production, biomethane scale up as well as hydrogen scale up, and getting that into the systems. And that's where we come to the ongoing energy legislation revisions, the points about, like, for example, guarantees of origins. What does that mean for interoperability in the energy system? And also kind of a general point, but an important one as well, the point of systems thinking. The kind of dialogue that we have here is important. The kind of dialogue that we have, for example, with ENSA, the European Net Zero Alliance. We have to scale hydrogen, we have to scale biomethane, but we also have to use really every available technology that is suitable for a decarbonisation pathway. So not forgetting solar heat, working together with electricity. We want to keep bringing this back into the conversation because the systems approach really has to be maintained. In ENSA as well, we're working with connected end users. So, for example, the European paper industry, but also buildings. And on this point about buildings, this is really something where we have to stay calm. We have seen, for example, in the Netherlands, the role of gas was underestimated in terms of how important that is in buildings. So whenever we're going forward, we have to, you don't want to go from a situation where there is dramatic action at one level that then results in a U-turn, because you see this drain on other parts of the energy network, like the electricity system. So yeah, our feeling is that this kind of dialogue is very important. These are by and large sensible recommendations. We just have to make sure that we keep the processes as sensible and streamlined as possible, and that we don't send any wrong messages with any action in particular. Yeah, so I think I can wrap there and just again say thanks, and we're looking forward to the next updates very much.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, a relevant point. Not to overdo it now and be sorry later. Okay, so now I hand over to Dennis for the Q&A session. Please, Dennis.
Thank you very much, Annegret. Indeed, let me take over here to facilitate the last 10 minutes or so on the Q&A that we had foreseen. We saw a few questions coming in already in the chat. That's very good. Thank you for that. And we allocated them in the meantime. The first question comes from Julien Minsteed-Meinert from NG, asking us to elaborate a bit more on the reporting of these long-term contracts. I would hand it first to Cila and then to Mitja, asking you to stay within 1 to 2 minutes to have time for the other questions as well. Cila, please.
Thank you. Maybe a first reflection about this question is that it's very difficult to collect appropriate data on the long-term contracts because they are protected by confidentiality, and so it is very challenging to bring those elements together and to have a holistic picture about what are the contracts that we have in the EU. What we tried, we were working with together with the NRAs and also information from intelligence agencies, and this is how we were trying to put together. But and related to the long-term contracts, the two challenges are still there that we would like to get better understanding of, and this is about their indexation, like how they are indexed in relation to hubs, and then the other one is about their end dates. Mitja, I'm passing on to you if you want to add.
So really briefly, so context note, I mean, there are, of course, already reporting obligations when it comes to long-term contracts, related to REMIT, but we believe these should be strengthened either via REMIT or a separate data collection. And it's not like we've got a worked out kind of policy proposal, but we believe it's an area that should be kind of strengthened, and maybe, so which things in particular, the indexation of these contracts, and other things that are related to them, like flexibility, and maybe why. So it's because we believe such an important instrument in the gas market deserves proper kind of insight at EU level, especially because we are seeing now that there are these feedback loops between gas long-term contracts and hub prices that might not always work as was intended. So that's a brief answer.
Thank you, Cila, Mitja, for your reply. Indeed, also referring to Bronak's remarks about this, I don't think we see this as a way of restricting commercial freedom. I think we fully appreciate that, but it's indeed a matter of oversight without adding too much administrative burden. At least that's the way we see it. There was a second question coming from Gray and Wheel, I'm not sure from which company or institution, about this energy purchasing platform at EU level. I think in the meantime, Miguel already addressed that, so I wouldn't spend time on that now, but then move on to the next question, which came again from Julien from NG, which is about the targeted investment, and if we foresee any kind of EU guidance on how to work with the congestion and congestion income, I guess, so the auction premiums in this new market environment. And I think, Marcus, here you can come in to give a reply from our side.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, it's a very good point, and it's actually part of our recommendations. So I didn't have it on the slide, but if you then look at the report, this is in it. So, of course, we see these high congestion rents, auction premium, and I think the tariff network code already provides for the sort of the tools how to cope with that. I think on the one hand, of course, we see targeted investments, and I think these congestion rents could, where this is sort of also efficient to be used to sort of alleviate congestions. But on the other hand, of course, they are then there to be sort of to alleviate consumer bills. So if it's not used for the investments, it will sort of be passed back to the consumers and be considered. So I think this is very much a decision by, well, case by case, and needs to be looked at the national levels. But I think we have the tools, and yeah, I wouldn't see any guidance, but clearly a recommendation in the report from our side.
Thank you, Marcus, for your first reply. That's useful to have. I'll move on to the next question, which actually two questions coming to the same topic from Alex Barnes, the other one from Barbara Toth from REC. It's about, Miguel, you mentioned in your contribution this analysis on the missing links done together with NSRG and the targeted infrastructure investments. Both are asking if this analysis would be made public. So maybe you can comment on that, please. Miguel, are you still with us? No, I can't hear you actually. Does Miguel still have speaking rights? I hope so. Otherwise, there may be a technical hiccup.
He is still with us and his microphone is not open.
Nina, could you unmute Miguel if that is the case, if that's the issue? Otherwise, if we cannot solve it at short notice, Miguel, I would suggest you type the reply in the Q&A about the question if this document becomes public, the analysis of the missing links. And in the meantime, I will move on.
Yes. I think you can hear me now because
yes, now there
was a problem. I was muted and I could not unmute myself. So just to mention that the results of the missing links are part of the Repower communication that was published in May. So there is an annex 3 that provides the main result and what are the bottlenecks. Now, the Repower plan also comes, with the indications on what would be the best financing tools that could address these bottlenecks, and this is, work, that is ongoing, basically. So I would suggest to have a look in this Annex 3 with all the assumptions and the missing links, and if there are further questions, please, you can always contact us. Thank you.
Thank you for a very short and a very concrete answer, Miguel. I'm sure people have a look at the Annex 3 to see if that provides them with sufficient information, but that's really good to know. The next question comes from Ivo van Isterdal from Craig, our colleague from Craig, who's asking about the surplus profits. There's a bit of discussion already in the chat, also with Pavel coming in. This is a tricky topic. It's a bit more political. Are certain companies benefiting from the current very high prices? And if so, is there any policy intervention needed or beneficial? And maybe Joaquin, you can give a first reply with the caveat that this is not something we've looked into in detail, as Ivo knows, but it's something where, of course, we can have a discussion to see what would be a useful way to approach this difficult situation.
Well, I will try to provide a reply, but indeed the topic warrants or is warranting a very detailed discussion and can attract different positions. I mean, the specific question, who is gaining on the surplus profits, it would depend. It would depend on the type of contracts that are behind the procurement and the strategies, not only from the procurement side, from the buyers, but also how the pass-through of these prices are put to the final consumer. So indeed, there are producers and also wholesale companies that seem to be making higher profits in the view of the prices. However, it will be also depend on the prices that they are passing. And very complex question. The only thing perhaps I can add that in our recommendations in the MMR, what we are proposing is that we could further increase the transparency of those long-term contracts, because this will be also beneficial to determine the right policies. And I think also Pavel was mentioning that in the case of the EU producers, well, they are limited, and some of the targeted measures to address these surplus profits, it will be hard to implement also on non-EU or more complex to implement on non-EU companies. That's from my side.
Thank you for the quick reply, Joaquin. The need for a very complex issue, which is worth more discussion than we can offer at this stage. I will take one more question because we're running out of time, and that's the question from Francois Berthelemy. Sorry about that. It's about the question, how does ACER view the proposal of some stakeholders to introduce a cap on the gas price, and how does it relate to this proposal from our side to, let's say, monitor the interval price limits to these circuit breakers, as Miguel referred to them? Is it some kind of a counter proposal? And I would ask Sheila maybe to reflect on that.
I'm here. I have a problem with the camera, but I will try to address the question, since we are getting to the end of the webinar. This is probably the very controversial and very complex question that is coming up in the political debates once there are big gatherings, and there are views that kind of pushing for a cap, and there are views that pushing against that. We certainly see value in the markets because the markets were benefiting the response to the crisis, and also the whole EU legislative framework is geared to rely on these markets, that the markets would bring in as many solutions, and then the public elements or the public aspects would come in as I mean, not to push away the market, but like kind of an add-on. So what we are thinking of, and also we were not necessarily kind of thinking of counter proposing some things, but we were looking at what were happening in the markets, and we saw also that there were kind of sort of very strong reactions when certain sanctions or countermeasures were taken by Russia. So in that context, we were thinking that maybe in those moments, then some other kind of tools could help to calm the market or give some help to the markets to process these kind of unexpected type of information that would arrive. And this is our thinking behind this proposition altogether.
Thank you, Cila, for providing the additional background on indeed what is our thinking behind this proposal and how it relates to the discussion on the potential cap on gas prices. I'm aware there are more questions in the chat, but we also promised to finish actually at 11. So I think time is running out and we'll have to close here. Let me say a few words by way of closing. I think we're all aware that we are facing really unprecedented times and we need a lot of flexibility and resilience to get through this, not just now, but especially, of course, in the coming winter. What we try to show in the analysis and also in the recommendations is not only that there are certain areas where additional measures or policy interventions could be beneficial to ensure security of supply, to ensure that the social measures are in place, but also what needs to be preserved. Because the market functioning, despite the difficult, the really tough circumstances, has delivered secure supplies across Europe and has enabled us, as Pavel also pointed out, to attract the LNG, the gas from abroad when it was needed. So I think it's really important that we, while the discussion, of course, has to take place on what needs to be improved in these very difficult circumstances, that we also safeguard the part that has served us all well, and that we avoid that any kind of policy intervention would have unintended consequences and would maybe actually make us worse off rather than improve the situation. As Annegret said in the beginning, the report will be published, the market monitoring report, at least the gas wholesale volume, will be published next week. So stay tuned for that. Take a look. Please read it, show it, and send us your comments. And also, I think it's really important for those of you who are out there in the market to ensure that the information keeps flowing from the market participants to us, to the policy makers, because we see policy decisions being taken at a very high speed, and we need to ensure that the connection between what the political objective is and what the consequences would be in the market, that this remains an open and transparent dialogue, and that the politicians who would decide oversee the consequences before they take the final decision. That's my final call. Thank you all for joining us today. It was a very lively discussion. Thank you to all the presenters. Annegret, thank you for opening, and I'll close the webinar here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.